Hey guys, so this is session 14 tutorial from the last week of January's block day. That was January 29th and 30th. So this one's recapping session 14, which is all about seeing social scientists and like the way that they see and analyze the world and kind of using that lens to analyze your text. And so I just want to go over the anchor chart that you were supposed to glue in. It looks like this, has 4 corners, and it talks about and it breaks down the 4 different parts to the social scientist lens. So there's the history one. So when you're doing this kind of work with your literary nonfiction, you're not going to do it with the whole book, but I would choose like a pivotal scene or a pivotal moment in your book and say, okay, well, I need to really think about, well, what's happening historically? What's happened here? And where did this knowledge come from? So where do I have background knowledge on this? Is the author providing background knowledge that I need to go back to? Do I maybe need to fill in some of my own blanks? And whose perspective is missing from this recount of this historical event, right? You have to be aware that in your literary nonfiction books, the author tends to only talk about one perspective. So whose perspectives isn't being represented in this story? The next box over is all about geography. Where does this happen in the world or even in the United States? What impact did the location have on what happened? You would be surprised about how impactful location, where events are happening at a specific time in history. They tend to go hand in hand, and they tend to have implications of one another. So just being aware of what's happening or where things are happening can be really important. And how do people interact in with this place? It's definitely going to be different depending on where you are, where the events are happening. So that's the geography box. And then the next one is economics. How do people choose to use their resources? That is going to depend on the geography and the time period. So it's really interesting how these kind of all interact. But just commenting on how resources are being used can be an interesting way to analyze as a specific passage. The next one is how are goods, services, and money distributed among people and groups? That is huge. That's going to tell you a lot about the society, the way it's brought up, and just if there's like a caste system, all of that information can be helpful and useful for you to really understanding the full implications of what's happening in your books. The next one is civics, or otherwise government. So what's the government like? What's the government setup? So a lot of the time, government does have a huge influence on history, geography, economics, all that stuff. So you are going to see that in your literary nonfiction books. How do people participate in the government? And just being aware of that. Who benefits from the government? And I know that some of you are going to struggle with some of these. This doesn't relate to my book, but I think if you really take a step back and start to think, if you feel like it doesn't apply to your book, like to certain situations, maybe thinking of it holistically. Okay, so what's going on here? Maybe even thinking like, why would an author even create this book, and kind of looking through that lens. Now, in your notebook pages, it's a 4 corners. So on the other side, you've got that uh, whatchamacallit, the anchor chart, and then on the other side is your four corners where you're doing your thinking and all of that. In the center, you should have a sticky note and where you're indicating what passage you're investigating. What passage are you look through these different lenses with? And that is your expectations for session 14. If you guys have any additional questions, come please see us in class or in tutorial. English out.